Downtown Decatur, it's the Faber Files. Hello, I'm your host, Bill Faber. Because democracy demands debate, we present this program of public issues and interests. Nowhere else on local broadcast TV do you see extended conversations or debates about issues that face our local community. Today's special guest is Professor Eric Freyfogle, Professor of Property at the University of Illinois. He is renowned throughout the nation and the world for his writings and his thinking about ecology and land use. I have in front of me one of the books that Professor Freyfogle has authored, and I read it a number of years ago, and it absolutely influenced my understanding of private property rights and land use. One of the comments that Professor Freyfogle makes in his writing and in his conversation, his speech, is that long time ago when the Indian chiefs would be sitting around the fire council to decide the fate of the future of their nation tribes, they would say to themselves that we must plan out for our people 200 years with regard to any decision that we make. And Professor Freyfogle launches the same advice that we should use for our land use planning and for the generations to come, that we have a responsibility to think forward 200 years as we plan our communities. I hope you enjoy Professor Freyfogle's conversation this evening at the Unitarian Fellowship in Decatur, Illinois. Thanks for watching.
Our speaker today, Eric Freyfogle, was born and raised in Decatur, and he and his wife, Jane Moore Freyfogle, are 1970 graduates from Stephen Decatur High. 1970. Jane's father, you may remember, was Bob Moore, who for years was co-owner and then president of Haynes and Essex here in town. She wasn't able to be with us today, but Eric attended Lehigh University, where he majored in history, and after graduating from the University of Michigan Law School in 1976, he served his 4-year Army obligation working in the Pentagon as an assistant to the Army General Counsel in the Office of the Secretary of Army. Following that and a 3-year stint in a large law firm in Indianapolis, he joined the U of I law faculty. And in 2012, Eric was honored when he was named as a Swanland Chair, one of the most distinguished titles on the Urbana campus today. I looked that up a little bit to find out more about it, and they had a nice little piece on Eric's work, and so I'll use that as part of my intro here. It says, this was in a press release when he was named in 2012. Freyfogle's work is broadly interdisciplinary. Interdisciplinary, I can't say the word, but drawing upon history, philosophy, biological sciences, economics, and literature, and is guided by a conservation ethic that seeks better ways for humans to live in nature. He is a prolific writer on ecology and conservation issues, widely considered to be an international expert on environmental policy and land conservation. He is the author or editor of 12 books, and that may be more now since 2012, on issues involving the complex relationship between humans and nature, and has lectured around the world on these topics. His scholarly articles have appeared in numerous publications, including the law reviews at Cornell, Duke, Michigan, New York University, Stanford, UCLA, and Yale. So we're pleased to have you here, and Decatur, Illinois, speaking to us today. Eric.
Thank you, Joyce. Maybe somebody can correct me, but wasn't Edward Everett Hale the main speaker at the dedication of the Gettysburg Senate?
I think
3 hours.
Everett.
3 hours.
3 hours, and then Lincoln got up for 15
minutes. Nobody remembers the 2-hour talk. Everybody remembers the 3-minute talk.
Eric, could you possibly use the hearing microphone because some people don't hear so well?
It's on, and it just, if you move it up to your type.
Okay, thank you. So I want to offer to you today some fairly half-baked ideas, by which I mean ideas that I'm continuing to mull over some and to probe them and refine them and to see what worth they might have. We face some quite severe social problems today, ones that seem to be getting worse, and we need to be thinking critically about them. If we can, tracing their origins and trying to identify their root causes. In my mind, I think there are 3 of them that rise above the rest. One is the problem of environmental degradation, ecological decline. Climate change, of course, is what's in the news, but before that we were concerned about the so-called 6th Great Extinction Crisis, the decline of species worldwide and the sort of biological soup that's taking place in many of our landscapes. Our oceans are declining. We are overloading the biosphere with nitrogen and phosphorus. Our soils are degrading. We are slowly sapping the health and fertility of the planet. The second problem is what's commonly called economic inequality. More and more of the money is being pushed into fewer and fewer hands. The statistics here, for those who don't really pay close attention, are truly stunning. What public opinion surveys have shown is that people grossly underestimate the level of inequality in our country. And it's not just neutral market forces at work. There's power that's being wielded. Our economic system, political system, our institutions have been, are being manipulated. I use the term here inequality because it's the common term, but of course nobody really thinks we ought to have economic equality, that everybody should get paid exactly the same. What we mean is we have too much inequality, but I think it is revealing that we don't have a good way to talk about that. The third problem, I would say, is just the role of big money in government and taking control of governments everywhere and the distortion of government decision-making. Here again, I think the facts are worse than commonly understood. This is a subject political scientists have been looking into, and the conclusion that they have come to very strongly in recent years is what the ordinary mass of people want has no influence whatsoever in the federal government. That isn't to say that the federal government doesn't sometimes do what people want, but it's only because there is economically powerful interests that want the same thing. When they diverge, government goes with what people with money want, pretty much all of the time. These are severe problems, and we're not really dealing with them very effectively. It's not that people don't care. It's not that there aren't reform-minded people out there who are trying to do something about it, progressives we might call them, but their efforts are not succeeding, and so why is that? I don't mean to say that there hasn't been a lot of social progress in the past generation or two. That there of course has been. We are in the late stages of a long crusade to promote individual civil rights, to respect and elevate the individual as such. This campaign has brought huge successes. And the dominant moral thinking behind this reform effort, I think has never been more accepted. It's never been more influential. That is, this respect for individuals as such, all of them without regard for race or sex or ethnicity, religion, and the like. Has race discrimination come to an end? No, but it's viewed as wrong, and everyone says so. They might disagree about what qualifies as discrimination, but when it exists, everybody condemns it as wrong. And I think that's huge progress. This civil rights thinking, this accentuation of individual moral worth, this push for respect and equality for all people, it has brought gains. So much so that we are prone, many of us, to keep pushing on it. To keep pushing on it to deal with today's problems. If this is the reform ethic, the mode of thought that has brought progress in the past, that maybe it can be adequate to deal with today's problems as well. And so in the environmental arena there, we've got talk about a right to a healthful environment, or a right to clean water or clean air. We're pushing this individual rights agenda into the environmental arena. In the case of inequality, of course, here we tend to focus on education. We want to enhance the equality of opportunity for all. We want to have a level playing field that's open to everyone. We want to plow more money into education for individuals, helping them get ahead, helping them get better jobs. Well, we've pushed these lines of reform using the rhetoric of individual moral worth and equality, this rhetoric of what I would call liberal individualism. But I would say it isn't really working, not to address today's problems. Most Illinois citizens don't know that they are protected today by an entire article in the state constitution that guarantees a right to a healthful environment. Article 11 of our Constitution adopted in 1970. We have a right to a healthful environment, and yet it's accomplished essentially nothing. And I want to say further that I don't think any individual rights rhetoric is going to help us deal with the decline in our natural fabric, with ecological degradation generally. With respect to education, yes, of course, an education, more education, better education can help an individual as such do better. It can help the individual get ahead in the system, but it doesn't really change the system as such. College graduates get paid better not because they have degrees, but because they get better jobs. And if you want more people who earn more, you need to increase the number of jobs, not the number of graduates. With respect to the takeover of government by concentrated wealth, here I think the rhetoric of civil rights, this sort of liberal individualism, really doesn't work. It sort of runs aground in a sense. I mean, what does it mean to respect all individuals equally in the political realm? It seems to me that the liberal ideals here are more supportive of the other side in a sense, the side that seems happy with the rich taking over government and manipulating it to their advantage. We respect individuals by letting people do what they want, spend as much as they want on campaigns, and get as much influence as they can, get all the power they can. That is to say, by taking over the government. I want to generalize on this last point a little bit. And that is to say that respect for individuals as such, for autonomy and legal equality, or freedom from constraints, that this kind of thinking has been essentially absorbed and put to considerably good use by defenders of concentrated wealth and power, by defenders of those who degrade nature. That is to say, the language that was once the language of reform is now, in many settings, the language of reaction. So this brings me to my half-baked idea. What I want to say is that the mindset of individual moral worth, of civil rights, of equality, which has worked so well for so long in addressing social ills, just isn't working today to deal with our problems. And it can't work. We need different ways of thinking and talking about today's problems, a new reform mindset. To put this on a bigger scale, I want you to think back in American history. It was about 250 years ago that our revolutionary era began. We might date it with the Stamp Act in 1765. And if we do, that means we've come to the 250th anniversary of it this coming year. This has been a reform trajectory in world history that began with the revolution and very much focused on escaping feudalism, on helping individuals as such gain moral worth, of promoting individual liberty and promoting equality. That's been the trajectory we've been on. That's been the drama of American history over the past 250 years. And I want to argue that I think it's time for a new era to begin, a new chapter to begin. this revolutionary ethic of individual worth needs to give way to something new. In fact, I want to go further here and say I think the very success of this civil rights rhetoric, the very success of this 250-year drama of promoting individual liberty, that in fact has allowed my three big issues to grow. It's created an environment in which they can flourish without really being seen clearly. And as I've said, this liberal civil rights rhetoric is now being used most effectively by forces that defend the rich and the powerful, and that attack government efforts to constrain them. So how is it that these liberal ideals might be problematic? Well, first of all, there's of course deeply embedded in them a deep distrust of government. I mean, that's where our revolutionary era began, a revolt against a foreign government, a distant government. And that line of thinking is very powerful even to this day. In fact, the way we define rights in this country, in contrast, by the way, with most nations around the world, we defined our rights vis-a-vis government, is freedom from governmental interference in our lives. I think there's been in this trajectory also a decline in our emphasis on the common good as such. When everything is a matter of individual choice, there is no common good. When we highlight and celebrate diversity, when we honor individual choice, when we talk about our many differences, we push aside what we share. We push aside what we have in common. We spend a long time protecting the rights of people to pursue their own individually chosen paths. But when we do that, how do we then justify constraints on individuals as such? How do we justify putting limits on people's appetites? Putting limits on the landowner who wants to abuse land, putting limits on the rich people who want to influence government to the extent of their wealth, putting limits on corporations that slash wages for workers despite record profits, and then push employees to become independent contractors, stripping them of benefits, cutting regular hours, and ending their predictable employment. I think also the collective action itself just becomes more problematic when we see the world as a collection of individuals and we want to sort of honor their power and ability to make decisions for themselves. And so we look for solutions at the individual level. It's been, I think, a particular plague on our environmental reform efforts to be focused so much on what people as individuals can do instead of looking to the ways that we need collectively to make changes in the system. I want to propose that we need a major change in our cultural trajectory, that our 250-year era that began with the Stamp Act in 1765 needs to give way to a new era. And I don't mean that we should abandon civil rights thinking, individual liberalism. I'm not saying that at all. I mean instead that we need to revive and greatly strengthen the idea of the common good, that we need to be celebrating the similarities among us more than the differences, that we need to ask how we can improve our plight collectively. We need to stop thinking of ways we can help individuals get ahead within the system and to think critically about the systems themselves as such, and to think about ways that working together we might improve them. And so in the environmental arena, we need to be talking about visions of healthy landscapes at large scales. I mean, if we were living collectively well in our central Illinois home, what would our landscape look like? We need to be thinking about major tinkering with our economic system, changing the institutions, the arrangements of power so that it results in a distribution of income that we think is tolerably fair, that's somehow just, although first, of course, we have to think more clearly about what economic justice might mean. With respect to campaign reform, we can't be pushing that by asking about the rights of individual voters or campaign supporters as such. I mean, we need to be guided by some vision of democracy, some vision of power being held by the demos, by the people collectively, the sovereignty of the people collectively. Democracy is a collective enterprise. So is a republic, by the way. It's not about individuals trying to exercise as much power as they can. It's about how can we develop forms of government that respond to what we collectively want. All three of these problems that I highlight are about power, about private power, including private power that uses government as a tool to get what it wants. In a world that liberates individuals and lets them act as they please, subject only to minimal constraints, the strong can then dominate the weak. They can, they have, and they are. Not all of them, of course, by no means, but enough of them, more than enough, to distort our world. And our civil rights thinking, our individual liberty thinking, makes this system seem more legitimate. Our two political parties today, let me say, are both liberal ones in the classic sense of the term. I think they both focus on the individual as such. They may have different individuals in mind that they want to protect. I want to say that what we need, frankly, is a much different political approach. We need a shift toward community. We need a shift to talk about the common good. And by common good, I do not mean, I emphatically do not mean some summation of the preferences of individuals as individuals. And in that effort to promote the common good, we need to realize that government is our only collective tool. It is the only tool that can carry enough power to contain, or even to try to contain, the ill effects of concentrated private power. So the call for small government, I want to say, is the call for private power to complete and continue its exploitation. It's the call for us to continue down the path that is going to make all of our major problems today much worse. This brings me finally to my title. Maybe some of you know it, The Tyranny of the Present Escaping. It's a line, of course, attributed to Cicero, the Roman orator and Stoic philosopher. Cicero said that the main purpose of education is to enable people to escape the tyranny of the present. That is to say, to step back from the world in which they live and think critically about it, to gain some appreciation of the big structure of a society and a culture, and to ask fundamental questions about the main elements of that. And we always need to do that. We need educated people who can do that. We collectively need to be educated in that sense. For the last 250 years, we've been on a trajectory, as I say, largely escaping feudalism, escaping sort of oppressive hierarchical orders. And it's been a trajectory in which we have honored the individual as such. We've honored our separateness. We've honored our individual liberty. This has been a good era. We shouldn't turn our back on it. There's been huge successes that have come from this. And we need to hold on to those successes. But I want to say that we need to move into a new chapter. Our next era, the next 250 years in a sense, it needs to be a different one. The emphasis needs to be on interconnection. It needs to be on interdependence. It needs to have a focus on what we share, on the common good, as a supplement to where we've been over the past 250 years. I think if we can do that, we can collectively take charge of these responsibilities. We can deal with these kind of problems that are looming out there. Unless we do so, though, I fear we're going to continue to struggle.